I work in theater, but I've never been comfortable on stage. So, anyway, good afternoon. So come on in. So we'll let folks wander in, especially since the last session went just a touch long. So good afternoon. I'm Ed Williams. I'm the Director of Operations for Portland 5 Centers for the Arts in downtown Portland. And we run a few theaters in downtown. A lot of folks ask, what's this Portland 5 thing? And so forth. So this is who we are. You've probably been to one of our theaters, maybe. So Portland 5 Centers for the Arts. The 5 comes from the 5 theaters that we operate. And that would be the Keller Auditorium, the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and then the Hatfield Hall, which contains 3 theaters, the Newmark, Dolores Winningstad, and Brunish. We operate approximately 330,000 square feet across the 3 buildings. And we're an operation that welcomes over a million people a year, 1,000 shows per year. Wow, that's pretty cool. 1,000 events per year, and we are the 5th largest performing arts center in the country. So the couple of our buildings. So this is Keller Auditorium, downtown Portland. You okay? Okay, all right. This is Keller Auditorium, built in 1917, renovated last in 1966-67. So it went 50 years between the first 2 renovations, and it's been another 50 since then for there. We operate this as basically our roadhouse. This is where Broadway comes in, Broadway across America, all the big Broadway shows. We also do commercial shows, comedians, rock shows, things like that here. Seats 3,010 people with all the pit seats in. And you can start to see what we're going to talk about during this presentation and the basic problems surrounding a theater. The Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, you're probably familiar with the big Portland sign on Broadway. This building was built in 1927 and was last renovated in 1984. It went from being the Portland Public's Theater in 1927 to being Paramount in 1930, and then in 1983 it closed, and then in 1984 it reopened as the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and it got its Portland sign back after 53 years of the Paramount sign. Schnitzer is 2,710 seats inside the auditorium, and again, this is the home of the Oregon Symphony, but it's also Metropolitan Youth Symphony, lectures, book tours, comedians, some rock shows. Rock shows are interesting, and in this older theater, rock show gets going with a lot of bass, and plaster starts to filter down from the ceiling. It's kind of interesting. The Antoinette Hatfield Hall is also where our office building is, and it contains 3 theaters, the Newmark, the Dolores Winningstad, and the Brunish Theater. So the Newmark Theater is an 880-seat sort of mid-sized theater. It's the only theater we have that has continental seating, meaning there are no aisles down the middle of the seating area. So if you happen to be in seat number 18 or so in the middle of the bunch, you're going to have a little bit of a problem getting out to go to the bathroom in the middle of the show. And Newmark hosts pretty much anything you can think to put on stage. Comedians, music, ballet, opera for the summertime. You can't do a full big opera in there. Dolores Winningstad Theater, based on Elizabethan Shakespearean kind of setup for some of the theaters in Old England. And this is a smaller theater, seats about 250 people on 3 tiers. And this is a general theater for smaller acts. Oregon Children's Theater does a lot of work in this theater as well. And we also, it tends to be one of our incubator theaters where we have the smaller local theater companies that come in and sort of do their shows as they sort of work up to getting into the bigger theaters. The venue here that's not shown is the little Brunish Theater, which is known in our business as a black box theater. It's basically, think of it as a conference room on steroids. It's just a big empty box with risers and seats that are put in temporarily. We also manage Southwest Main Street in between the Hatfield and the Schnitzer. And this event you're seeing here is from an event in the summertime called Music on Main Street. From first part of July until almost Labor Day, some years past Labor Day, we host every Wednesday, we host free concerts out on the street for there. So we gather, we've had crowds as big as 500 or 600 people out there on the street because it's completely free unless you want to buy the food and beverages and things like that. So what I want to talk about today. So I basically want to go through sort of a brief outline of how our business works. It kind of informs how we operated and what we went through over the last 3 years and so forth. Everybody, I'm not going to go into the great detail. We all know what happened with COVID. I'm not going to go into the details on that too much, but we do have some impacts. Sorry, I did that again. I apologize. And one of the things that pertains specifically to us, we have buildings that you've just heard when they were built. My newest air handler is 36 years old, right? So I'm dealing with systems that are anywhere between 36 and 50 plus years old. And most of them haven't been upgraded much in there. So that lends itself to a lot of sort of issues with air handlers and so on. Part of the whole thing that we deal with, and we still deal with to this day with some groups and some folks, is fear, doubt, second guessing. What are we doing? Why are we here? Can you help us? That type of thing. Lack of understanding. Navigating expectations of our clients, of our patrons, of our employees in various things. Then we'll talk a little bit about some lessons learned. So how does our business actually work? So a lot of folks think, hey, you're in those theaters, you get to see all the shows for free and things like that. Yeah, not quite. So we are an operating entity. I actually work for Metro, and we're an operating entity. The buildings themselves are owned by the city of Portland, and they always have been. We through Metro actually operate them, run them, sell tickets, and provide value-added services. The shows belong to the promoters. So think of us more as the landlord. We really have nothing to do with the shows. And in fact, to the dismay of some people, we also, as a public entity, we don't have a lot of right to turn down shows. So if you see, for instance, a show come into the Schnitzer or Keller or something that seems an inflammatory person or guest or band or group or somebody that you don't like to see in Portland, it's likely because we couldn't say no. We weren't allowed to by law, because we're a public auditorium. So we provide the services to actually book the events, schedule the events, and then we provide value-added services like the ticket takers, the ushers, the stagehands, security, engineering, custodial. And then how we make our money is that we collect a portion of the ticket sales, we collect a portion of the t-shirts, merch, posters that are sold out front, and we collect a portion of the food and beverage. So think of my paycheck next time you buy one of those $12 beers, right? So there you go. The biggest thing, though, that's going to affect a lot of what I'm going to talk about here this afternoon is this basic fact. Our business is built on putting hundreds to thousands of people in the same room, sitting shoulder to shoulder with each other, all breathing the same air. So that's something that wasn't real popular a couple of years ago. In fact, it was legally impossible a couple of years ago. All right, so I'm going to go back through. This is a lot of word salad. I don't read my slides. I'm more of a storyteller. But I want to point out a couple of things on this. I'm going to go back to the Keller situation a couple times during the presentation. February 27th of 2020, just about a month after the first US case was announced, Disney's Frozen moved into Keller Auditorium. Monster show. 22 performances, sold out. If you're familiar with Frozen, if you have anyone in your life who is probably 13 or younger and so forth, they know all about Elsa, they know all the songs. They come to the shows in full dresses and gowns with wands and the whole 9 yards. So that moved in on the 27th of February. Remember that date. The next day after they moved in, the first Oregon case was announced. So at this point, internally inside P5, we're sitting there going, something's going to change here pretty quickly. We need to start thinking of ideas. Going through, Frozen opened on March 5th. We got 7 whole performances in before the governor said, sorry, can't have gatherings of more than 250 people. You need to go away. Well, if you remember back in those times, everybody thought, it'll be a month. No big deal. We'll be back. It'll all be solved and everything else. Well, it didn't quite happen that way. And at the end of March, toward the end of March, the governor issued the first stay-at-home orders. The end result of this is that we did a first round of layoffs at Portland 5 that amounted to about 93% of the staff right off the bat. A whole bunch of people lost their jobs. Of course, the impact was industry-wide as well, worldwide. Every theater, every movie theater, every place that gathered folks. One of the things I want to point out, though, that one of the groups of people that got hit hard with the layoffs were custodians and engineers. 2020 hindsight says that might not have been the best idea. Right? So as we went through the next year, right, you may remember that various entities, various theaters, various groups tried to reopen several times. And every time they did, all of a sudden, as soon as they did that, 5, 6 days later, bang, we had a case surge. And everybody said, oh, stop, right? The other problem that we had was, again, hundreds to thousands of people sitting shoulder to shoulder in the same room. At one point during the peak of this, we were trying to figure out if we could reopen. If we can come up with a scenario, we could talk to the governor's office and say, here, we've solved this. We know how to put people far enough apart, social distancing and so forth. There were literally 4 or 5 of us one day walking around the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall with 6-foot sticks, putting them in the seats, trying to figure out how do we do this as far as a puzzle. We solved the puzzle, no problem. We were able to we could put people in those theaters 6 feet apart, keep them nice and safe, but it took us down to a 22% occupancy in the rooms. The rooms, to even come close to breaking even, really have to hit about a 60% occupancy. So there was no scenario that we could come up with during the height of this thing that would actually keep us in business where we weren't spending more money than we were earning. We were already losing a fair bit as it was. Shows kept canceling because why wouldn't they all cancel at once? Well, you might remember also, well, we could be back in a month. This kept happening, right? Oh, it's not going to say, we'll be right back, you know. And so shows basically would go out, we got a show 2 months out. Okay, we're getting too close. All right, cancel that one. Then we'll cancel the next one. So there was never a time during the entire 17 months we were shut down that there weren't like daily cancellations happening for shows that were like a month and a half out, basically saying, yeah, we know we're not going to be back. One interesting point, though, is that this is the monthly burn just to keep the buildings sitting there. Every month, 3 buildings, about 980 grand, just to keep them sitting there on the ground, doing nothing, earning no money, and paying a staff of what turned out to be 17 people by the time we were done with all the layoffs. So now, fast forward a little bit, and I'm going to come back a couple of timelines. Summer 21. Spring 21, vaccines had come out. Everybody's saying, ooh, this looks good. And again, entities tried to reopen. Things tried to restart. Didn't happen. There was this bump and stop and bump and stop and bump and stop thing going all the way through. Let's open. Oh, nope, stop, wait, no. You know. So that happened continuously. In our business, the conventional wisdom was that we were going to be closed into the fall. The earliest we'd be able to see is maybe October, maybe Thanksgiving. We might be able to do the Christmas shows, possibly. Then at the end of June of 21, the governor, in concert with California and Washington and a bunch of other states, said, yeah, we're going to be just like the other states. We're going to cancel all the restrictions. You can open at will. Go ahead. Okay, we're sitting there going, October. Well, all of our staff was laid off, all right? So, but we had an event coming up, August 8th. We figured August 8th was far enough out at 44 days. It was the Franco Escamilla comedy show at the Schnitzer. So we said, we're going to make that our first show. And we gave ourselves 44 whole days to do it. So let's go back to that spring and summer, what happened when it got real, right? So you can imagine as we're sitting there going, what do we do as we're facing the shutdown of the buildings and completely shutdown of the buildings? Remember who owns the buildings, the city of Portland. We had meetings, I sat in meetings with us and the venue department at Portland and so forth that said, well, you know, well, basically they're your buildings, Portland, so we're just gonna hand you the keys. We're gonna walk away and be laid off and fired ourselves and you can do what you're gonna do with the buildings because we can't afford to operate them anymore. And that was the point where the city of Portland said, well, hold on, we really don't want to see the Schnitzer and the Keller and these other theaters go away and so forth, so we'll lend a little bit of a hand. And so they were able to, thank goodness, through the course of the thing. The city council was able to come up with a little bit of money here and there. So what do? You keep the basics going, right? We kept basic heat, basic water, fire sprinklers, alarm systems, things like that. Start patrolling the buildings, making sure you flush toilets, run faucets. We don't want Legionella building up in the pipes. Again, the thing continued. Oh, it's just going to blow over. No big deal. So we had another round of layoffs, though, that summer because it didn't blow over. So that's when we got down. By Labor Day of 2020, we were down to 17 people. And that was the core skeleton staff that continued with us all the way through the rest of the pandemic. So what do you do during this time? You got 3 closed buildings. You've got the perfect opportunity to do maintenance, right? 2 engineers, 3 custodians, 330,000 square feet. You can do about as much maintenance as you can think of to do, if you have the time and the effort to be able to do that. This is in between people worrying about their own health, not wanting to come into downtown Portland, and so forth. So we did what we had with the staff we had. A couple of interesting things. We did earn GBAC. I don't know if you folks know the ISSA's Global Biorisk Advisory Council. We earned the certification as GBAC during this time as well. And a couple of interesting things. Disney's Frozen, if you remember, never loaded out at Keller. It sat there because in theater, in Broadway, and so forth, if the show sets, costumes, all that kind of stuff are not in a theater, then they need to be on a truck. There is no warehouse to take the sets back to. So since the stuff was sitting at Keller and the show had nowhere to go, it stayed at Keller. The one bright side from this whole thing, though, that was kind of interesting is we were installing a $10.5 million sound system at Keller at Schnitzer Concert Hall. That project was funded, paid for, started, money was in the bank, and contractors were on site already working. Talk about the ultimate shovel-ready project. We simply continued. Given what we did to Schnitzer, though, it's probably a good thing we didn't have any shows. So Schnitzer looked like that or worse for a solid year as we were going through. We pulled out literally hundreds of seats, scaffolding, great big sky lifts and so forth to install approximately 130 separate little speakers for this very sophisticated sound system. We did have one fairly major disaster. I'll talk about why in a little bit. But we destroyed the main sound control room at Keller Auditorium. We had what we thought was a roof leak. It turned out to be something very different. But that's another $750,000 that we had to replace that entire sound room because we had no people around. Now, you'll remember that during 2020, we had a fair amount of civil unrest between the George Floyd murder in May and then through the summer and through, it's a political year, it was an election year. So you might remember downtown Portland was a little, let's call it unrested at times. So we suffered some broken glass, we suffered some things like that, not as much as some other buildings. But one of the things we did do, and I just kind of wanted to make this point because it's something that our management and our folks at Metro and us, me, so forth, made the decision. We said, look, you know what? Because after the first riots that came through, the first protests, we had some broken glass. We had 5 or 6 people on our management staff that were saying, board up the buildings, close them off. There was a bunch of us, though, that said, you know what? No, let's not do that. These are Portland theaters. They belong to the people. They literally belong to the people. They're city buildings. How about we don't do that? How about we pay for a little bit of broken glass now and again, and we don't board the buildings up, but we keep the lights on, and we make ourselves look like we're here. We make ourselves look like we're alive. And honestly, I think that helped. It gave the community this idea that, hey, you know what? They're still there. And I think we can almost show it, that it resulted in us showing a presence. It resulted in us having far less vandalism and damage and so forth. I think through the entire 17 months we were shut down, we replaced glass in 4 storefront doors, 2 or 3 poster cases, and we cleaned up some graffiti. But compared to what was going on in some of the other buildings around town, we fared very well during that time. So, now we're going to go back and continue on from here. When we last left our story, most of our staff's laid off. Most of them have found new jobs. Most of them aren't ready to come back, won't come back. We've given ourselves a whole 44 days from that point to the first show of the season. Buildings are sitting there static. No HVAC, it's basically everything's shut down. We shut off about 80% of the power in the buildings. We turned the heat way down, as low as we could. And everybody was itching to come back to shows in June of 21 when it was announced, hey, you can go. Within hours of the governor's announcement that we were going to open, the phone lines were flooded. When can I buy tickets? When are you coming back? When is this show? So forth. We had a box office staff of 2 at that point trying to answer all those calls. So now what do? The order was reopen right this frickin' minute, right? With no staff. We did have some folks that were rehires that were able to come back. And so we have a very simple saying in theater, the show must go on. We're going to figure out a way to do it. And I am so amazingly proud of our folks as far as custodians, security, engineers, even our management that pitched in. Our executive director was in the lobby running a floor polisher at one point to get the schnitzer ready to go. So we used the folks we had, we did the best we could, and then we prepped each facility in order. So Schnitzer came first, there was next to show at Keller, we did that one next. So we concentrated the resources we had on what we had. So what were the main concerns that everybody had at the time? Sanitation, right? Everybody thought, that was back when we still thought that you touch any surface and you're gonna die, right? That was kind of earlier in the science and so forth at the time. Water quality was big, right? And of course, obviously, air quality. So we did what everybody else in the industry did. We stuck MERV 13 filters in the air handlers. And one of the other things we did with the air handlers is we had them all serviced. We brought in a balancer, we tested their airflow, we went through and took care of all that because remember, my newest air handler is 36 years old. So a lot of them have very floppy dampers and very loose controls and hinges and gaskets and various things like that. So it's tough to maintain good airflow when half the airflow is leaking out of the side of the cabinet, right? And airflow became a huge thing with everybody, and still is. We did lab test our water so that we made sure that we didn't have any Legionella, mold, whatever else in there. And we basically did the major things. We have fire life safety systems, let's get them inspected, let's have a final service, that type of thing. So we also worked out the SOPs for masks and vax checks that were to come. So we got back in business. When you came to the theater, you had to show proof of vaccination. You had to be masked. The good news is that when folks came back, I think folks were so starved to come back to a show that everybody was pretty, for a while at least, everybody was pretty universally happy. No problem, I'll wear my mask, except when I'm eating my cookies in the seat, you know. And so, you know, things were going along. By the end of 2021, we'd only been open for September, October, 4 months by the end of 21, and our sales and business were back to 50% of pre-COVID already. So folks kind of came roaring back. Still had staffing problems. We still have staffing problems to this day. We've talked about that a lot today, staffing problems. So the one unfortunate thing that's gone on is people have, you probably remember mask fatigue was setting in really heavily back in especially 21 into 22. And so it became one of those things where a lot of our patrons started becoming a little frustrated. And it's unfortunate, it's sad to see a patron who doesn't want to wear their mask taking it out on a 75-year-old volunteer usher, you know, in the lobby, but it doesn't happen very often. So that's a good thing. So one of the big things we suffer with, or we fight right now, is for those of you who work in this business, who deal with air handlers and air conditioning and stuff, everybody is an expert, right? We have artists union, the American Federation of Musicians, who is the union that the symphony musicians belong to, came to us with about a 12-page order that said, you must do this and this and this and this and this and this and this to your air handlers, your airflow, various other scientific, you know, things. Some part of it pulled, sort of cherry-picked from ASHRAE and from OSHA and from various things like this, but all run through, we think, like a business agent at the union, right? The information was disjointed, it was misinformation, there was a lot of misunderstandings. For instance, I need 100% outside air at full fan running in the auditorium on the stage. I need the stage at 74 degrees. It's 22 degrees out, right? There is no system in any of our buildings that can make up what, a 50-degree difference between outside air and what they want on stage. So you have to have the compromise conversations with folks and tell them what's necessary or what can be done. But we talk about the airflow in these buildings. I use Keller again as an example. So I put some math up here for you, and hopefully, I think I did the math right. But at any rate, in 1966, when this building was designed, when the renovation was designed, they did airflow calculations based on a certain amount of CFM per person for occupancy. So that room can seat about 3,000 people. At the time, for an auditorium, the recommendation at the time was you do 15 CFM per person. That works out to a 45,000 CFM fan, basically, right? Well, if you've ever gone to Keller Auditorium, you know that that space is rather cavernous that you sit in that auditorium. It's approximately 750,000 cubic feet of air. So when you do that math, you end up coming out to, a relatively respectable 3.5 air changes per hour. ASHRAE wants 8 to 15 for an auditorium nowadays. So today, that calculation would be done completely differently, but we have to deal with what we've got and the fact that you've got a building that hasn't been updated in 50 years. All right. So, as I say, everybody's an expert. We were getting airflow requests like we talked about before, and it was interesting to see how they were coming in, and folks that were, in a lot of cases, they were passing them on to us saying, we've been told that, here you go, right? And unfortunately in our business, so if you run an office building, you have clients, you have occupants, you have people you have to satisfy as far as your business, but they're usually the same client, day after day after day, month after month. In our case, it can be a different client every night. Different client, different contract every show. This contract says we need X, that contract says we need Y. So for us in the FM world, we're sitting there going, great, what's the crazy request that's going to be for tonight's show that's different from last night's show? I'm going to take my 22-degree air and try to warm it up to 75 degrees for the ballet dancers. There's some things you just can't do. So we had a lot of conversations with folks. What can you do? This gets back to basic customer relations. This gets back to helping to talk with our salespeople and talk with folks and say, hey, we need to talk to the client. We need to let them know kind of what's real, what can be done. And so the compromises that got worked out during that time was great. Okay, no problem. Backstage where the performers are, all masks all the time, KN95s, nobody goes near anybody. You don't have any P5 staff in the building, or in backstage anyway, while the performers are there. So a lot of challenges with all the wide array of stuff. So how does this actually work as far as the business itself? As I intimated to before, it's all different in every contract, right? The contracts drive the business. The clients, in effect, have the last word to say, if you can't meet my airflow recommendations or my needs, we have the right to say the artist will not go on. And so now what do? You've got somebody that says, I'm not going to go on stage until you make my dressing room 78 degrees and I have X amount of airflow and things like that. That's when conversations have to happen between P5 management, lawyers, union representatives, and so forth, who then eventually get down back to the artist and say, really, do you really not want to go on tonight? There's 3,000 people sitting out there waiting for you. Seriously? So that's one of the things that we have to deal with. The clients are basically in charge. And when you think about it, to be fair to the clients, we have a lot of tours that come through. If you think about Broadway still to this day has the most restrictive COVID requirements of any group that's come through. Most have dropped them. But Broadway, because of Broadway League in New York and the unions that represent the actors and the stagehands and so forth, have kept in New York City, have kept it tight. And so Broadway across America has kept it tight all the way around. Broadway show comes in, we're not allowed backstage. P5 employees, when anybody's in the building, we can't even go backstage. So they kick us out, and they do their thing. Think about it from their standpoint. These tours are in a different town every week. They're going to different theaters every week. They're living in buses, they're living on airplanes, and they work, the actors and the swings and the musicians work a crazy schedule. It's really easy to get sick. and their voices and their performing, talents are affected by their health. So you can understand to a certain extent why they're very sensitive about this and wanting to make sure that the theater is healthy. So basically, we had to start navigating the new ways, and we still are to this day. An awful lot of this stuff, and we talked about it a little bit in a couple of other sessions I was in this morning, a lot of this is driven by fear. We're getting better. Now that we're coming through this thing a bit, the data is getting better, the science is getting better, we have more information now, but back in the day, you may remember, I think we all do, how much weird information was coming from 17 different directions all at once. And on any particular day, depending on which person searched Google for what, we would come up with different requests about, well, I'm worried about this. And we'd have to continue to explain to them, well, that doesn't apply to this type of building because we're not, a food service organization, so you're not going to be eating off of the tables in the dressing rooms, things like that. So that type of thing. Educating people, as most of us know who have to deal with clients, educating people in a deep way is pretty much impossible. And less information is more. The worst thing you can do with a client is sit there for 10 minutes and go, well, we can't do this for you because the air handler does this and it's this, and the fan moves this much air, and we can't do this for this and everything else. Because their eyes glaze over, they look at you like you're an idiot, and they say, just make it happen. So we find that the simpler answers are better. Yes, we'll take care of it. We'll do the best we can. It also helps to have our sales and booking people go back and talk to them and say, hey, we can't really do this. What can we work out as a compromise? And we lean on code a lot. We lean on code and regulations. We lean on OSHA. We lean on ASHRAE. We lean on Oregon Health Authority and various other things that say, hey, these are what the codes are. We meet the codes. And that's always a fun conversation because, yeah, we meet the codes for when the building was built, So that's always, lawyers like that kind of talk. Most other people don't. We were working through the issues. So we had 1,000 different questions. Everybody was asking questions. What do we do? What do we do? This type of thing. And in the end, what we did is what we all do in this business every single day. That way, we figure out how to go under it. Make it work. The show must go on. So have we gotten back to pre-COVID normalcy? No, we haven't. We're still not there. We're back pretty good. We're going to have a good year this year, but we're still not quite there. As I say, it's been a weird couple of years. So some of the lessons that we learned through this thing. So one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, the beginning of this thing, everybody's saying, oh, we're going to be shut down for a month. No big deal. And we kind of fired everybody. We were left with, like I say, 3 custodians, 2 engineers to take care of 330,000 square feet of building. Now, it's not occupied, but you still got to do things. You still have to maintain things. You have to keep after things. And when you don't have those people, it's impossible to do, right? You cannot keep up the type of function that you would. One of the things that we missed, honestly, was acknowledging the trauma, right? Everybody had been going through this thing. And for a lot of us who were laser focused on, we got to keep the buildings healthy, we're going to reopen someday, we got to do this, we forgot that there was a bunch of people that we were working with that had just been laid off, had family members that were getting sick, were worried as hell about coming into downtown Portland, all right? So we missed that, to be honest. That's one of those ones that I look back and think, please, whoever you are up there in the sky, do not let this happen again. But if it does, that's one of the things we have to stop and back up a little bit and do. We could have made better use of technology. For instance, we lost track of what was going on in some of the buildings because we don't have very many people. Yes, we have a BMS system, and yes, we can look at temperatures in the buildings and so forth, but when the buildings are running at 45, 50 degrees in the winter, they get humid. And so one of the things we had to be very careful about is that we warmed up all the spaces every once in a while so we didn't start growing mold and things like that. We also learned about being careful about what you shut off. We went through a little bit of a panic stage at the beginning where kill all power, we got to cut the power bill. So we were killing power for everything that wasn't a life safety critical system. That was March of 2020. In early July of 2021, we discovered what happens to a 12.4 cubic foot freezer full of chicken. It's not good. So, so that's one of those things that and that brings me to that next point, is keep in touch with your F&B provider. We didn't know about a freezer full of chicken because they panicked and ran out of the place just like everybody else did. And so we said, well, there's nothing on that circuit we need, shut it down. So, adjusting operations based on the weather. Remember I told you Keller Auditorium, we destroyed the sound room? That was because in December of 2020, we had one of those atmospheric river December horrible rainstorms come through. And Keller Auditorium, renovated in 1966, air conditioner pits, right? All the machinery's inside the building, so there are ventilation pits in the roof, right, below the roof level. Each one of those is a roof, has a drain. However, on every floor plan for Keller Auditorium, what you'll see for those drains, it's called a floor drain, because that's how they coded it back in '66. It's outdoors, it's on the roof, it's a roof drain. But when you go underneath the roof and you look at the drain body, it's a floor drain. It's the exact same hardware as you'd have in a bathroom or a laundry room. So that's great, except when you have a clog in that pipe, 93 feet down the pipe, down in the basement of the building, and you get a torrential December rainstorm that fills up one of those pits. It goes down as fast as it can until it hits the clog. The next thing it does is it backs up the pipe and it finds the first drain it can to exit the pipe, which in our case happened to be a janitor sink 45 feet above the sound room in a janitor closet up on the 4th level. So for who knows how long, we had water literally cascading 4 stories down into the sound room and through the ceiling. Fine, would have been great, didn't get discovered until 45 days later because we didn't have any people in the building. The sound guy happened to go in to pick up some of his personal effects, which had been destroyed in the sound room. They're covered with mold, so forth. So that's why I say, pay attention to the weather. If we had been sort of cognizant of that, we would put some eyes on the buildings a little bit more, but we didn't. Complacency is a big thing, right? Everybody says, we're not open anyway, so why should we do this, and so forth. And finally, we've kind of figured out late, we have to find some way to have a little fun. We never really did do that, but we threw Nerf footballs around and stuff every so often. This is probably the biggest lesson that we learned, though, and it's funny, I was talking to one of my colleagues earlier this morning about, how a lot of the times we get really cranky about all the maintenance tickets that come in. Oh, I got another maintenance ticket. Oh, somebody's complaining about a sticky doorknob. Ah, gosh darn it. Light bulb's out, whatever. Well, this is one of the valuable lessons we learned. We take for granted, at least we did anyway, I don't know, we take for granted how much help we get from building occupants. Every single day in these buildings, we have hundreds and hundreds of eyes and ears in the facilities, in every room, working, playing, doing whatever they're going to do, dressing rooms and so forth. And so, yeah, we get a lot of complaints about there's a drip, there's a light out, there's a problem, there's a leak, there's a runny toilet. And yeah, those can build up and say, you get sick and tired of them. But that Keller sound room problem came directly from the fact that we didn't have enough eyes on. If we'd had sort of normal staffing, that would have been caught the same day. And we could have at least mitigated the problem by putting some plastic up or something. But 45 days went through between the leak and it had completely dried out. Mold had grown 4 or 5 feet up the walls, the whole 9 yards, right? So, yeah, it's a big thing. Anyway, today, look at that, I'm almost right on time. Today, March 2023, where are we currently? Well, most clients no longer call for any COVID restrictions other than Broadway. We have a production meeting every week on Wednesdays, and on our schedule table there's a COVID restrictions tab on the schedule. And every single week now it's becoming the mantra of, no COVID, no backstage, no masks, no vax, except for Broadway. The bookings are back, the events are back. Patrons they say sales are gangbusters. We're back to pretty much pre-pandemic sales levels, but people aren't showing up. They're buying the tickets, but they don't arrive. And so it's kind of interesting. And if you've been downtown Portland at nighttime, anytime recently, you might understand why. For some folks, they may feel a bit uncomfortable with that. So anyway, we still have staffing shortages, but we're on pace to have a nearly normal fiscal. So I have one last thing. This is my Steve Jobs moment, right? So remember Frozen? Frozen finally loaded out of Keller Auditorium July 10th, 2021. So moved in February 27th of 2020, moved out July of 2021. Probably by default the longest residency of any Broadway show at Keller ever. Right? So there you go. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. If you have any questions, I'm here, and off we go. Thank you.